Ever proud and boastful, Oblivion's mad prince stood 1/5 day of mid-year among the frigid peaks of Skyrim, and beckoned forth Harsine for parley. The huntsman god materialized, for this was his day, and the boldness of sheogorath intrigued him. Without equal, sheogorath holds his realm, giggling loons, flamboyant amateurs, and craven mutilators. The mad prince will ply profitless bargains and promote senseless bloodshed for nothing more than the joy of another's confusion, tragedy, or rage. So it was that sheogorath had set a stage on which to play himself. Without haste, the coy prince preferred his contest. Each prince was to groom a beast to meet at his place again, 3 years to the hour, and do fatal battle, expressionless behind his fearsome countenance. Harsine agreed, and with naught but dusting of snow in the drift, the princes were gone to their realms. Confident but knowing sheogorath for a trickster, Harsine secretly bred an abomination in his hidden realm. An ancient deadric he summoned, and imbued it with a foul curse of lycanthropy. Of pitch heart and jagged fang, the unspeakable horror had no peer, even among the great hunters of Harsine's sphere. In the 3rd year, on the given day, Harsine returned, where sheogorath leaned, cross-legged on a stone, whistling with idle patience. The prince of the hunt struck his spear to the ground, bringing forth his unnatural, snarling behemoth. Doffing his cap, sly as ever, sheogorath stood and stepped aside to reveal a tiny, colorful bird perched atop the stone. Demurely it chirped in the bristling gusts, scarcely audible. In a twisted springing heap, the deadric was upon the stone, leaving only rubble where the boulder has been. Thinking itself victorious, the monster's bloodied maw curled into a mock grin when a subdued song drifted in the crisp air. The tiny bird lightly hopped along the snout of the furious deadric. Sheogorath looked on quietly, mirthful, as the diminutive creature picked at a bit of the detritus caught in scales betwixt the fiery eyes of the larger beast. With howling fury, the were thing blinded itself to pluck away the nuisance, and so it continued for hours, Harsine looking on in shame while his fine beast gradually destroyed itself in pursuit seemingly oblivious bird, all while the chirping a mournful tune to the lonesome range. Livid but beaten, Harsine burned and ragged the corpse, and withdrew to his realm, swearing in forgotten tongues. His curse still hang in those peaks, and no wayfarer tarries or for fear of his wrathful aspect in those obscure heights. Turning his heel, sheogorath beckoned the minuscule songbird to perch atop his shoulder, and strolled down the mountain, making for the warm breezes and vibrant sunsets of the Absian coast, whistling in tune with the tiniest champion in Tamriel. Darius Sheno found himself running as fast as he could. He had no idea what he was running from or towards, but he didn't care. The desire saturated his mind. There was nothing in the world except flight. He looked around for landmarks, anything to place himself or to use as a target, but to no avail. The featureless grassland through which he was sprinting extended as far as the eye could see. Just have to keep running, he thought to himself. I have to run as fast as I can. On and on he ran, with no end in sight or in mind. Standing over Darius Sheno while he lay quietly in his bed were his mistress, Vaermina, the Dreamweaver, and the mad god, sheogorath. Vaermina looked down with pride at this disciple of hers, and was boastful of her little jewel. Such potential in this one, through dreams of inspiration. I have natured literary talent into fruition, and now he stands in acclaim as emerging bard and poet. He will gain much favor before I tire of him. Sheogorath too gazed at the young Breton artist, and saw that he was indeed famous among the other mortals. Mused sheogorath, but how many are those who hate this mortal whom you have built? Is the hatred of mortals which confirmed greatness, and not their love? Surely you can accomplish this as well. Vaermina's eyes narrowed. Yes, the mortals are indeed often foolish and petty, and it is true that many of their most bold have been despised. Do not worry, mad one, for I have the power to achieve many forms of greatness with this one, hatred among them. Perhaps, Dreamweaver, it would be amusing to show who has this power. Inspire foolish, arrogant hatred of this mortal for 10 years, and then I will do the same. We shall see whose talents are most efficient, free of aid or interference from any other Daedra. At this, she relaxed into a confident pleasure. The mad god is indeed powerful, but this task is suited to my skills. The mortals are repulsed by madness, but rarely think it worthy of hate. I shall take pleasure in revealing this to you, as I bring more suitable horrors out of this mortal's subconscious. And so, in the 19th year of his life, the dreams Darius should know had been experiencing began to change. Fear had always been a part of the night for him, but now there was something else. A darkness began to creep into his slumber, a darkness that sucked away all feeling and color, leaving only emptiness behind. When this happened, he opened his mouth to scream, but found that the dark had taken his voice as well. All he had was the terror and the void, and each night they filled him with new understanding of death. Yet, when he woke, there was no fear, for he had faith that his lady had a purpose. Indeed, one night Vermina herself emerged from the void. She leaned in close to whisper into his ear, "Watch carefully, my beloved." With that, she pulled the void away, and for hours each night she would reveal to Darius that the most horrible perversions of nature, men being skinned and eaten alive by other men, unimaginable beasts of how many limbs and mouths, entire populations being burned, their screams filled his every evening. In time, these visions gnawed at his soul, and his work began to take on the character of his nightmares. The images revealed to him at night were reproduced on the page, and the terrible cruelty and hollow vice that his work contained both revolted and fascinated the public. They reveled in their disgust over every detail. There were those who openly enjoyed his shocking material, and his popularity among some only fed the hatred of those who found him abhorrent. This continued for several years, while the infamy of Darius grew steadily. Then, in his 29th year, without warning, the dreams and nightmares ceased. Darius felt a weight lifted, as he no longer endured the nightly tortures, but was confused. "What have I done to displease my mistress?" he wondered out loud. "Why has she abandoned me?" Vermina never answered his prayers. No one ever answered, and the relentless dreams faded away to leave Darius in a long, deep sleep. Interest in the works of Darius now waned. His prose became stale, and his ideas failed to provoke the shock and outrage they once had. As memory of his notoriety and his terrible dreams faded, the questions that raced in his mind eventually produced resentment against Vermina, his former mistress. Resentment grew into hatred, and from hatred came ridicule, and over time, ridicule became disbelief. Slowly, it becomes obvious. Vermina never had spoken to him at all. His dreams were simply the product of a sick mind that had righted itself. He had been deceived by his own subconscious, and the anger and shame overwhelmed him. The man who conversed with a deity drifted steadily into heresy. In time, all of the bitterness, no doubt, and sacrilege focused in Darius in a creative philosophy that was threaded throughout all of his subsequent work. He challenged the gods themselves, as well as the infantile public and the corrupt state for worshipping them. He mocked them with all perverse characters, sparing no one and giving no quarter. He challenged the gods in public to strike him down if they existed, and ridiculed them with no such comeuppance was delivered. To all this, the people reacted with outrage, far greater than they had shown his previous work. His earlier career had offended only sensibilities, but now he was striking directly at the heart of the people. His body of work grew in size and intensity. Temples, nobles, and commoners were all targets of his scorn. Finally, at the age of 39, Darius wrote a piece entitled "The Noblest Fool." ridiculing the emperor god Tiber Septim for integrating into pathetic Nine Divines cult. The local king of Dania, who had been humiliated by this upstart in the past, saw his chance. For his sacrilege against the empire, Darius Sheo was executed with a ceremonial blade. In front of a cheering crowd, hundreds. His last bitter words were gurgled through a mouthful of his own blood. 20 years after their wager was placed, Vermina and sheogorath met over Darius Sheo's headless corpse. The Dreamweaver had been eager for this meeting. She had been waiting for years to confront the deadric prince over his lack of action. I have been deceived by you, sheogorath. I performed my half of the bargain. But during your 10 years, you never contacted the mortal once. He owes none of this greatness to you or your talents or your influence. Nonsense, croaked the mad god. I was with him all along. When your time ended and mine began, your whispers in his ear were replaced with silence. I severed his link to that from which he found the most comfort and meaning, and withheld the very attention the creature so desperately craved. Without his mistress, this man's character could ripen under resentment and hatred. Now his bitterness is a total and overcome by a madness fueled by his rage. He feeds me in my realm as an eternal servant. Sheogorath turned and spoke to the empty space by his side. Indeed, Darius Sheo was a glorious mortal, despised by his own people, his kings, and even by the gods, he mocked. For my success, I accept 70 followers of Vermina into my service, and the dreamers will awaken as madmen. And thus did Sheogorath teach Vermina that without madness, there are no dreams and no creation. Vermina will never forget this lesson. In the days before the Orsinium's founding, the spurned orc folk were subjected to ostracism and persecutions even more numerous and harsh than their progeny are accustomed to in our own age, so that it was many champions of the Orsimer traveled, enforcing what borders they could for all proliferation of their own people. Many of these champions are spoken of yet today, among the cursed legion, Grama the Hairless, and the noble Emig Grara. This latter crusader would have certainly risen to legendary status through Tamriel had he not been subjected to the attention of the certain deadric prince. Emig Grara was the bastard son of a young maiden who was killed in childbirth. He was raised by the shaman of his tribe, the Grilla in the peaks of what we now call Normer Heights. Late in his 15th year, Emig forged by hand an ornate suit of scale armor, a rite of ascension among his tribe. On a blustery day, he pounded the final rivet, and draping a heavy cloak over the bulky mantle, Emig set out from his village for one last time. Words of his exploits always returned home, whether defending merchant caravans from brigands or liberating enslaved beast folk. News of the noble orc crusader began to grace even the lips of Bretons, often with a tinge of fear. Less than 2 years after ascending to maturity, Grokara was making camp when a thin voice called out from the thickening night. He was surprised to hear the language of his people spoken by a tongue that obviously did not belong to an orc. "Lord Kyra," said the voice, Tales of your deeds have crossed the lips of many, and have reached my ears. Peering into the murk, Emig made a silhouette of a cloaked figure, made wavy and ethereal by the hazy campfire. From the voice alone, he had thought the interloper an old hag, but now decided that he was in the presence of a man of slight and lanky build, though he could not discern no further detail. "Perhaps," the wary orc began, "but I seek no glory. Who are you?" Ignoring the question, the stranger continued, "Despite that, Orsimer glory finds you, and I bear a gift worthy of it." The visitor's cloak parted slightly, revealing nothing but a faint glittering buttons in the pale moonlight. And a bundle has withdrawn and tossed to the side of the fire between the two. Emig cautiously removed the rags in which the object was swathed, and dazzled to discover the item to be wide, curved blade with ornately decorated handle. The weapon had heft. Emig realized the brandishing on the elaborate pommel disguised with more practical purposes of balancing the considerable weight of the blade itself. It was nothing much to look at in its present condition, thought the orc, but once the tarnish was cleaned away, and a few missing jewels restored. It would be indeed a blade worthy of a champion 10 times his own worth. Her name is Emig Grara, spoke the thin stranger. Seeing the appreciation lighting Grokara's face, I got her for a horse in secret warmer climes. In my old age, I'd be lucky to even lift such a weapon. It's only proper that I pass her on to one such as yourself. To possess her is to change your life forever. Overcoming his initial infatuation with the arc of honed steel, Emig turned his attention back to the visitor. Your words are fine, old man, Emig said, not masking his suspicion, but I'm no fool. You traded this blade once, and you'll trade for it again tonight. What is it that you want? The stranger's shoulders slumped. Emig was glad to have unveiled the true purpose of this twilight visit. He sat with him for a while, eventually offering a stack of furs, warm food, and a handful of coins in exchange for the exotic weapon. By morning, the stranger was gone. In the week following, Emig's encounter with the stranger, Emig Grara, had not left its scabbard, and he had encountered no enemy in the woods, and his meals consisted of fowl and small game caught with bow and arrow. The peace suited him fine, but on the 7th morning, while fog crept between the low-hanging boughs, Emig's ears pricked up with the telltale crunch of a nearby footfall in the dense snow and forest debris. Emig's nostrils flared, but he was upwind, maybe unable to see or smell his guest, and knowing that the breeze carried his scent in the direction, Emig's guard was up. He cautiously drew Emig Grara from its sheath. Emig himself was not entirely sure of what all happened next. The first moment of conscious memory in Emig Grara's mind after drawing Emig Grara was the image of the curved blade sweeping through the air in front of him, splattering blood all over the virginal powder coating the forest floor. The second memory was feeling of frenzied bloodlust creeping over him. But it was then he saw for the first time his victim, an orc woman, perhaps a few years younger than himself, her body a canvas of grisly wounds, enough to kill a strong man 10 times over. Emig's disgust overwhelmed the madness and had overtaken him, and with all his will enlisted, he released Emig Grara from his grip and let the blade sail. With discordant ringing, it spun through the air and was buried in a snowdrift. Emig fled the scene in shame and horror, drawing the hood of his cloak to hide himself from the judging eyes of the rising sun. The scene where Emig Grara had murdered one of his own kind, a macabre one, below the neck. The body was flayed and mutilated, almost beyond recognition. But the untouched face was frozen in a permanent expression of abject terror. It was here that sheogorath performed certain rites that had summoned Malekith. And the 2 deadric lords held court in the presence of the disfigured corpse. Why show me this, mad one? Began Malekith, once he recovered from his initial wordless outrage. Do you take such pleasure in watching me grieve the murder of my children? His guttural voice rumbled, and the patron of the Orsimer looked up on his counterpart with accusing eyes. By birth she was yours, brother outcast, began sheogorath, solemn in aspect and demeanor. But she was a daughter of mine by her own habits. My mourning here is no less than your own. My outrage is no less great. I'm not so sure, grumbled Malekith, but rest assured the vengeance for his crime is mine to reap. I expect no contest from you. Stand aside. As the fearsome prince began to push past him, Lord sheogorath spoke again. I have no intention of standing between you and your vengeance. In fact, I mean to help you. I have servants in this wilderness, and can tell you where to find our mutual foe. I only ask that you use a weapon of my choosing, wound the criminal with my blade, and banish him to my plane, where I can exact my own punishment. The rights of honor killing here belong to you. With that, Malekith agreed, and took the wide blade from sheogorath, and was gone. Malekith materialized in the path of the murder, the cloaked figure obscured through a blizzard haze, bellowing a curse so foul to wilt the sounding trees. The blade was drawn, and Malekith crossed the distance more quickly than a wild fox. Frothing with rage, he swung the blade in a smooth arc which lopped off the head of his foe cleanly off. then plunged the blade up to its hilt in his chest, choking off the spurts of blood into a steady growing stain of red bubbling beneath the scaled armor and heavy cloak. Panting from this unexpected immediacy and fury of his own kill, Malakath rested on a knee as the body before him collapsed heavily backwards, and the head landed roughly upon the broad, flat stone. The next sound broke the silence like a bolt. I'm sorry, sputtered the voice of Emig Grara. Malakath's eyes went wide as he looked upon the severed head, seeping blood from its wound, but somehow kept alive. Its eyes wavered about widely, trying to focus on the aspect of Malakath before it. The once proud eyes of the champion were choked with tears, grief, pain, and confused recognition. To his horror, Malakath recognized only now that the man he had killed was not only one of his Orsimer's children, but very literally a son he had blessed, an orc maiden with years hence. For achingly long moments the two looked upon each other, despondent and shocked. Then silent as oiled steel, Sheogorath strode into the clearing. He hefted Emig Grara's disembodied head and bundled it into a small gray sack. Sheogorath reclaimed Neb Crisson from the corpse and turned to walk away. Malakath began to stand, but kneeled again, knowing he irreversibly damned his own offspring into the realm of Sheogorath, and mourned his failure as the sound of his son's hoarse pleas faded into the frozen horizon.